Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? It began with a scream that no one else seemed to hear. A single, sharp, guttural sound that sliced through the stillness of midnight like a rusty knife across a dry throat. Jordan sat up in bed, breath caught in his lungs, skin slick with cold sweat. He blinked, heart slamming in his chest, but the room was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt pressed down and smothered under a heavy weight, like sound itself had gone missing. His wife, Mara, didn't stir beside him. For a moment, he stayed frozen, listening. And then he heard it again. Not a scream this time. A sound like dragging, nails over wood, something being pulled, scraped, clawed, and it was coming from across the street. 506 Alder Lane. That house was supposed to be empty. Abandoned, actually. The cops had boarded it up 5 months ago. The old man who lived there, Mr. Winslow, had been taken out on a stretcher, muttering about the mouth in the basement and the bones that grew back. No one really knew what had happened. Only that after that night, no one wanted to touch the place. But tonight, there was something in there. Jordan crossed the room and parted the blinds, just enough to see. The street was dark, save for the flickering amber glow of the lone lamppost. Wind pushed the branches of the trees like skeletal arms, and across the road, the house looked wrong. It was there, and yet it shifted. Just a fraction, like it didn't want to be seen straight on. Like it knew he was looking. The front door, which had been nailed shut for months, now hung slightly ajar, swaying with the breeze even though the wind wasn't that strong. Jordan stepped back. Every nerve in his body lit up, telling him to not go outside. But something deeper pulled at him, a gnawing need to understand. He'd seen too much of this kind of thing lately. Flickers in his vision, doors half opened, static on every radio station for 30 seconds at a time. It always came back to that house. The one that shouldn't exist. Because here's the thing, Jordan had lived on Alder Lane his whole life. Played stickball in the cul-de-sac. Rode his bike past every house, knew them like old friends. But he couldn't remember when 506 had been built. Couldn't remember seeing construction or people moving in. It had just always been there. Except it hadn't. 3 nights ago, he dug up a photo from a neighborhood BBQ, taken just 2 years ago. He held it under the kitchen light, squinting at the background, and there was nothing where 506 should be. Just trees, an empty lot. The photo hadn't been doctored. He'd asked his dad, who'd taken it, and the old man just blinked and said, "Of course there was a house there. There always was. Why are you asking weird questions, son?" But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he saw when he zoomed in. In the patch of trees where the house shouldn't be, something stared out, a shape, pale, long limben, with too many joints in the wrong places. It had no eyes, and it was looking right at the camera. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, his clocks had stopped at 3:17 a.m. every night. His dreams had taken a turn, all filled with soft whispers and cracking bones and a smell like rotting flowers. Something wanted him to notice. And now, the scream, the dragging, the house. Still half asleep but wide-eyed, Jordan slipped on his hoodie and shoes. Mara shifted slightly, murmuring something in her sleep, and he froze, the door half open. He wanted to wake her, to tell her something wasn't right. But what could he say? That a ghost house was leaning funny. That an old man talked about mouths in the basement. No, this he had to do alone. He stepped out into the night. The cold hit him like a slap. A sharp wind moved down the street, not random, not natural. It moved toward the house, like it was being pulled into it. He crossed the street. With every step closer, the air grew heavier. The light from the lamppost dimmed, as though something were sucking the glow out of it. He felt watched. And not from inside the house. from beneath it. The front yard was overgrown, covered in brambles that hadn't been there last week. They curled up over the fence like black veins. The path to the door was cracked, the concrete soft in places like dried flesh. The front door creaked open further when he stepped onto the porch. The sound, low and wet, wasn't wood moving, it was breathing. Jordan reached out. His fingers trembled as he touched the door. It was warm. Not like something left in the sun. Bodie warm. And it pulsed, just once, like a heartbeat under the surface. He pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick and wrong. It didn't smell abandoned. It smelled alive. Damp and sweet, like meat left in a crawl space. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Pictures hung on the wall, but when he glanced at them, his stomach turned. They moved. Not flickering like video, more like they shifted every time he looked away. Faces distorted. Eyes changed color. One photo had a man and a woman smiling at a birthday party. But when he blinked, the woman's mouth had grown wide, cracked up past her ears, and her eyes were two clean holes, bored straight through her head. He kept walking. The dragging sound had stopped. The house was quiet now, expectant, waiting. He turned a corner into what should have been a kitchen, but the layout made no sense. Cabinets built upside down, a sink full of teeth, a clock that ran backward and chimed 13 times at once, and the door to the basement, wide open. The smell came stronger now. Copper and mold and grinning rot. Something deep below wanted him to come down, wanted him to see. Jordan didn't know why he stepped toward the basement, only that he had no choice. His body moved like it had rehearsed this in a dream he couldn't remember. Step by step, he descended. The stairs stretched on far too long. He passed more light bulbs than made sense. 40, 50, 60. Each swinging slightly, even though there was no breeze. Then, suddenly, he was at the bottom. The room down there wasn't a basement. It was a cathedral, an underground cavern of wet stone and thick roots pulsing with a slow red light that had no source. In the middle stood a chair. No, not a chair. A throne. Built of bones. Child-sized bones. And sitting in it, draped in tattered robes that clung like wet seaweed, was the old man. Mr. Winslow. But not quite. His eyes were gone, hollow and steaming. His skin was gray and split open in places where new growth pushed through. Antlers, fingers, teeth. His mouth opened and shut without sound, and when he finally spoke, it came from behind Jordan. "You're finally here." Jordan turned. The thing that spoke was not Winslow. It wore his face, but stretched and sagging, like a balloon half, deflated. It stood on too many legs, each one bent backward. Its skin was lined with eyes that blinked at different times. "We've been waiting, Jordan." Jordan tried to scream, but the sound didn't come out. His throat tightened, muscles locking. The thing stepped forward. "You remember now, don't you? This isn't the first time you've come. Not the first time you've died in this house." 100 memories slammed into him at once. Flashes of pain, fire drowning, being torn apart. Again, again. "This house eats you," the creature whispered. "And you always come back." It reached out with a hand made of stitched mouths. "And this time, you brought someone with you." Jordan's mind reeled. Mara. The thing grinned with every face it wore. And then the red light blinked out, plunging everything into darkness. Thomas hadn't slept. It wasn't for lack of trying. He had laid down around 200 a.m., eyes burning, body aching from the long drive and emotional stress of arriving at the house. His father's house. That didn't seem to exist until yesterday. He'd spent hours walking its halls with that yellowed letter in his hand, brushing his fingers over dustless railings, checking the same rooms again and again, trying to convince himself that he wasn't dreaming. The place was too perfect. No cobwebs, no creaking boards, not a single mouse dropping in the attic. It felt watched. So he laid in the old guest bedroom, covers up to his chin like a child, trying to pretend that it wasn't unusual that the house hummed at night. Not the kind of hum you hear from electrical circuits or distant roadways. This one seemed to come from inside the walls, like someone whispering behind plaster, like a mouth too close to your ear. And then at exactly 30:17 a.m., the floorboards under his bed knocked. Not a creak, not a pop, but a knock, 3 times. Slow, deliberate. Thomas froze, breath caught in his chest. He didn't move. Didn't dare look under the bed. He just stared at the ceiling, waiting for something else. Another knock, a footstep. The sound of someone breathing who wasn't him. But it didn't come. Eventually, he sat up, took the flashlight from the side table. No lamps worked here, of course, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. He didn't look under the bed. Not yet. Instead, he pressed the light to the floorboards. The wood was smooth, unmarked, but cold. Ice cold. He pressed his palm to the spot. Nothing out of place. Still, the sound hadn't been in his head. He'd heard it. Felt it, even. He forced a laugh into the empty room. But it sounded wrong. Like it didn't belong. Like something was listening, and it didn't think the joke was funny. He slept, barely. Dreamed of walls that bled and a whispering man in the hallway, face blurred like a memory left in the rain. By the time the sun had risen, he was already up, already dressed, already standing in the attic with the letter in his hand again. The trunk was still there. He hadn't touched it the night before. Not after what he saw in the mirror. The broken photograph of his father smiling beside a man with no face. But this time, he brought gloves and a crowbar. He pried the old trunk open slowly, like the wood itself might scream. It didn't. Inside, beneath a moth-eaten blanket, was a stack of manila folders, dozens, maybe hundreds, and each one had a name written across the tab in ink so dark it looked burned into the paper. Thomas picked up the top one. Marty Harid. He opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, old, black and white. A family portrait, all smiles. A single snapshot of a farmhouse with a tire swing, and then another picture, a body hanging from the same swing. The head tilted at a sickening angle. Thomas turned the page and nearly dropped the folder. A hand-drawn floor plan of the very house he was standing in. But something was off. There was an extra room, a basement. He furrowed his brow. He'd walked the whole house last night. There was no basement, no stairs, no entrance, nothing. He flipped through the rest of the folder, newspaper clippings. FTROFTWO FO UNDEAD FUL PLIY SUSPT'd, scribbled notes in handwriting that didn't look quite human. Names of other people, other addresses. The words COLESTD, USTLE, repeated over and over like a mantra. He set the folder aside. Next one. ELECHO, a woman in her 20s, high school teacher. Died in a house fire. But the autopsy report stapled to the back had a strange note. No suit in lungs. Cause of death, unknown cranial trauma. And again, a floor plan of this house. And again, the extra room. He pulled folder after folder. Every single one showed the same house. This house. Sometimes drawn in different architectural styles. Early Victorian, mid-century ranch, even a brutalist concrete box in one. But it was always this house. And always that extra room. The basement. He shoved everything back into the trunk and slammed it shut, heart hammering. Something about the papers made him feel watched. Like the house was angry at him for knowing. Like it wanted to take the knowledge back. He stood there for a long time, thinking. Then he remembered the knock. 3 knocks, a secret under the floorboards. He rushed downstairs, flashlight clutched tight in one hand, and went room by room, tapping on the walls, pressing on the floors, listening. In the dining room, near the fireplace, the floor changed. Not by much, but enough. He knelt down and pressed his ear to the boards. Silence. Then, a single knock. His breath caught. He knocked back 3 times. The house answered. Once. Twice. Then silence again. And then, click. A board shifted beneath his palm. He pulled it up with shaking fingers, revealing a metal ring bolted to a slab of wood. A trapdoor. A hidden basement. He hesitated. Of course he did. Every part of his body screamed not to open it, but his hands moved on their own. He gripped the ring, lifted. The door groaned like it hadn't been opened in decades. A thick, wet smell spilled out, like old meat and mold and something worse. He shined his flashlight down the stairs. They were made of stone, and they went deep. He should have called someone. He should have run. But instead he stepped down. 1, 2, 3 steps. Then the trapdoor slammed shut behind him. Darkness swallowed everything. He turned fast, nearly falling on the uneven stone, heart pounding in his ears. He beat against the underside of the door. Nothing. No movement. No give. He was trapped. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. He turned slowly, facing the long, narrow tunnel ahead. Paint peeled from the stone walls. Metal pipes jutted out like broken bones. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. And carved into the wall every few feet was a name. Dozens. Hundreds. The same names he'd seen in the folders upstairs. He passed Martin Creed, Helena Cho, Marcus Flynn. Each one had a handprint carved beneath it. Not drawn, carved into the stone, deep. Some of them were larger than they should have been. Distorted. Twisted. As he walked deeper, the air grew colder. Thicker. He saw things in the corners of his eyes. Shapes that moved when he didn't look at them. Whispers followed him. Soft, unintelligible words spoken just behind his ears. Then the tunnel opened into a small chamber. He stopped. There, in the middle of the room, was a single wooden chair. A man sat in it. Thomas couldn't see his face, just the outline, shoulders hunched, hands folded, head down. His skin was wrong, smooth but mottled, gray. The man looked up, and Thomas saw his own face, not similar, exactly the same. Same scar above the brow, same tired eyes, same everything, except for the smile. The man smiled at him with a mouth far too wide. "You came home," the copy said. Thomas backed away, flashlight shaking. What is this?" "This is where it begins," the copy said. "You saw the house, didn't you? The others never got this far." Thomas turned and ran, but the hallway was gone. Just more stone, more names. He ran until his lungs screamed, until the flashlight sputtered, and then he was back, at the room. The chair, the copy. "You can't leave until someone takes your place," the thing said, "and no one comes here unless the house calls them." Thomas sank to his knees. It was a trap, a lure, and he had followed it, just like his father must have. The copy stood, walked toward him, and whispered something in his ear that shattered his mind. He doesn't remember how he got back to the guest bedroom. He woke up just before dawn, drenched in sweat, the flashlight still in his hand. The trapdoor was gone, sealed. No sign it had ever been there. The house was quiet, too quiet, but the names were still in his head. He had to know, had to understand what was happening. The house didn't want to be understood, but he would make it talk, even if it killed him. But as he turned to look at himself in the mirror, his reflection didn't smile. It grinned. The morning light didn't make the house any warmer. Thomas stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, not moving. He watched himself for a long time, waiting, daring his reflection to slip again. It didn't. Not yet. He brushed anyway, slow strokes, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. A routine act, something normal grounding. But it didn't help. Not after what he saw in the basement, or imagined he saw. He couldn't trust that anymore. Reality felt thinner here, like the walls between dream and waking were stretched too tight. He hadn't hallucinated the trapdoor. He hadn't imagined the folders. He went back to the attic before breakfast, half expecting the trunk to be gone, replaced by some dusty box of Christmas decorations. But it was still there, square and black, the lock hanging open like a slack jaw. He pulled out a handful of folders at random and spread them across the attic floor. Every single one showed this house, and every single one had a name, a face, a story. But what chilled him now was what wasn't there. No police reports, no autopsy photos, no news articles online. He'd spent half the night on his phone, searching for any mention of these people. But it was like they never existed. Martin Creed. Nothing. Elena Cho. A name on a forum with no posts. There were hundreds of them. People with childhood photos, report cards, wedding invitations, all documented inside these folders, but nowhere else. He picked up one from the bottom of the stack. Something about it felt heavier. The tab read Isabel Wakafayald. The photograph clipped inside showed a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, pale skin, dark hair and messy braids. One front tooth missing. She wore a polka dot dress and a look of quiet defiance, like she didn't trust whoever was taking the picture. Thomas flipped the page. A drawing, childish and rough. Stick figures holding hands in front of a tall house with too many windows. The figure on the far right had no face, just scribbles. It was captioned in crayon M.E. Mo-M-Y-D-A-D-D-Y Ho-Si. Underneath that was a death certificate, but the date of death was blank. He turned it over, written on the back, in shaking cursive. She still runs in the halls. She thinks we can't see her. She's wrong. Thomas felt a chill travel straight down his spine. That's when he heard the laughter. Faint, high-pitched. From somewhere below, a child's laugh. He froze. Not because it was eerie or unexpected, but because it was playful, normal. It didn't belong here. Not in a place that felt so profoundly wrong. He dropped the folder and rushed downstairs, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other. Hello, he called out, already hating himself for doing it. Is someone here? No answer. Just the distant scuff of bare feet on old wood. He followed it through the narrow halls, past the empty sitting room and toward the back of the house, where the windows were nailed shut. The sound led him to a door he hadn't noticed before. Small, child-sized. It was under the staircase, a place for coats or a utility closet, maybe. Except it was painted red, and the knob was cold. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a tunnel. Low, narrow, made of warped boards and old plaster. Just tall enough for a child to crawl through. Or someone desperate. He shined the flashlight inside. The beam caught something at the far end. Motion. A braid vanishing around a corner. Wait, he called, and dropped to his knees. The tunnel was dry, but smelled of rot. The dust was thick, but undisturbed, like no one had been through in years. Still, he crawled. Slowly, each movement stirred tiny clouds of grime into his throat. After maybe 30 feet, the tunnel opened into a room. It was a nursery, painted a soft pink, faded with time. A crib sat in the center, its mattress stained and sagging. Toys were scattered across the floor, blocks. A ragged teddy bear with one eye, a music box shaped like a carousel. The music box began to play. Thomas stood slowly, staring at it. The crank turned on its own, a slow, sick lullaby. He stepped forward and stopped cold. The wall behind the crib was covered in names, carved deep. Not with a knife or a nail, but with fingernails. Some were scratched halfway through. Others looked smeared, like someone had tried to erase them. And near the bottom, in large, perfect block letters, T.H.O. Mass Nelson, he staggered backward, hand over his mouth. That was his name. Exactly. Full name. No middle initial. He dropped to his knees and clawed at the paint. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't pareidolia. It was real. He didn't remember carving it. Didn't remember this room. But somehow the walls did. There was a soft voice behind him. You came back. Thomas turned. The little girl stood by the tunnel entrance. Isabel Wakefield. No doubt about it. Same face from the photograph. Same dress. But her eyes, they were wrong. Too wide. Too dark. No whites. Just endless, shimmering black. Isabel, he whispered. She shook her head. I was never born, she said, her voice flat. I was built. He stepped back, heart slamming against his ribs. What does that mean? What are you? She tilted her head. The skin of her cheek cracked slightly, like dried paper. I lived in the house. Then I became part of it. Then it forgot me. Now it remembers. That's bad. She looked up at him. You should go. I can't, Thomas said. It won't let me leave. Her eyes shimmered. That's because it wants something. What? She looked past him, toward the name on the wall. You. He turned. The name had changed. Now it read, Tho Mas Nelson Sinacidi. When he turned back, she was gone. He crawled out of the tunnel in a panic, heart racing, lungs burning. When he stumbled back into the hallway, he saw something waiting at the end. Not a person, a shape. Tall, thin, wrapped in what looked like rotting wallpaper. No face, just layers of house wrapped around a human frame. It moved without walking, gliding. Thomas ran, up the stairs, past the attic, into the farthest room he could find. He slammed the door and braced it with a chair. Silence. For a long time. Then he heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. Not at the door. Under the bed, he didn't move. Not at first. Then, slowly, he crouched. Lifted the sheet. Nothing. Just floorboards. And then, a hand shot out, grabbed his wrist. Too small to be adult. Too rough to be a child. He screamed, pulled free, fell backward into the dresser. And then, he was alone. Nothing under the bed. No scratches on his wrist. No proof. He lay there for what felt like hours. Then he sat up, picked up his phone, and hit record. If he didn't make it out, someone had to know. He held it in front of his face. My name is Thomas Nelson, he said, his voice shaking. I'm inside a house that shouldn't exist. It's not haunted. It is the ghost. I think it was made. Ground, or maybe called here. It keeps records. It builds lives that never were. Children that were never born. People who never existed outside these walls. He paused. Then added, and I'm starting to forget things. I don't remember driving here. I don't remember packing. I don't remember what my mother's voice sounds like. Tears welled in his eyes. I think the house is replacing me. He ended the recording. Saved it. Backed it up. Then he noticed the time on the phone. 3:17 a.m. again. And again from the hallway, the sound of a knock. But not on the floor this time. At the front door. He walked toward it slowly, dread knotting in his stomach. Through the peephole, he saw someone standing outside. A man, dressed like a realtor, clipboard in hand, smiling too wide. Thomas opened the door before he could stop himself. The man grinned. You must be Thomas, he said. Welcome home. I have some documents for you to sign. Behind him, the sky wasn't morning or night. Just gray, endless, empty. Thomas looked past the man and saw it the house was not on the street anymore. No neighbors, no world, just dirt and fog. And the sound of a second knock. Oh, from inside the walls. Thomas didn't remember closing the door, but he was back inside. Alone. No sign of the grinning man with the clipboard. No contract. No pen. Just silence pressing against the walls like a rising tide. He didn't go back upstairs. Instead, he sat on the bottom step, breathing slowly, one hand clutching the edge of the banister like it might float him to shore. He tried calling someone. Anyone. His mother. 911. His old college roommate. But every number went to voicemail, and the messages he recorded sounded wrong when he played them back. Slurred. Stretched. Like they'd been filtered through broken teeth. And there was the time again, 3:17 a.m. The same minute. Every single time he looked, he walked to the kitchen. Still empty, still too quiet. But something had changed. The wallpaper on the far wall, he hadn't noticed it before. It was peeling slightly near the edge, just above the baseboard. Not floral or striped, it was detailed. Fine lines, curves, tiny boxes and names. He crouched and peeled more of it away. It wasn't wallpaper, it was a blueprint of the house, drawn directly onto the drywall, perfectly inked, impossibly complex, and not static, moving. Lines pulsed softly, like veins beneath skin. Rooms shifted when he blinked. New staircases appeared, hidden doors rearranged. The longer he stared, the more certain he became this house was growing. It wasn't built like a normal home. It wasn't designed once and finished. It evolved, responded, rearranged. He backed away slowly, but his heel caught something. He turned. The table in the center of the kitchen now had a piece of paper sitting on it. One page, yellowed, folded, waiting. Thomas picked it up with shaking hands and unfolded it. A deed, with his signature at the bottom. The ink was still fresh, but he had never signed it. He would remember that, right? He read it again. I, Thomas Nelson, in full understanding of the gift presented, hereby accept the living memory of this dwelling as my own. I accept the burdens, the inhabitants, the unfinished dreams, and the forgotten names as part of my story. There was no line for a witness, no seal, no date. He turned the page over, nothing. But as he did, a gust of cold air swept through the kitchen. He wasn't alone anymore. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, bare feet. Light. Pacing, he stepped out of the kitchen and into the hall, just as a figure passed, briefly, at the far end. A man in profile, dressed like someone who had never seen a mirrored outdated suit, high collar, blank expression. His skin was the color of paper left in the sun too long. He turned the corner and vanished. Thomas followed. But the hallway wasn't the same anymore. It had stretched. Now it was longer. Much longer. Dozens of doors on either side, none of which had been there yesterday. He opened the first one, a dining room, but not his. This one was set for 12, each plate still warm. The silverware moved slightly, vibrating like tuning forks. A chandelier above swayed without wind. He stepped inside, drawn by the surrealness of it. And as soon as both feet crossed the threshold, he wasn't in his body anymore. He stood at the head of the table, but he was shorter, younger. His mouth moved without consent. You promised, the boy version of himself said. The words echoed with two voices, his and something much older. A woman across the table wept silently. Her face was wrong, half-formed, like a wax sculpture still being shaped. Another voice, booming, deep, rattled the glassware. She ate the contract. We can't let her leave. Thomas jerked backward and found himself in the hallway again, panting. The door slammed shut behind him. He turned the knob. Locked. He opened the next one, and the next. Each room told a story, but none were his. One showed a man hanging upside down from the ceiling, reading a newspaper that had no print. Another had a woman made entirely of plaster, slowly breaking apart with each breath. Another was a hospital room with no lights, only the sound of machines trying to scream. Every room was a memory, but none he remembered, until the 12th door. He opened it, and saw himself, at 7 years old, standing in the middle of a backyard with a broken bird in his hands. It twitched once, then stopped. The boy looked up, right at him, and grinned. I told you not to come back. The door slammed shut. He ran after that, ran until the hallway ended, until the doors ran out, until he collapsed against a wall and gasped for air that didn't feel real. His hands were stained, not with dirt, with ink. The same ink as the blueprint, the same ink as the contract. It was on his arms, his fingers, inside his fingernails, soaked in it. He tried to wipe it off on the wall. It didn't come off. It only smeared into more lines, more doors. He had to leave. Now, he bolted down the main stairs, past the entrance, and flung the front door open, and stepped outside, into nothing. No lawn, no porch, no world, just gray, like the world had been deleted. He stepped back inside and shut the door. The instant he did, the foyer changed. A mirror now hung opposite the staircase. He hadn't put it there. He stepped closer, looked into it, and the mirror didn't reflect him. It showed a version of him. Same face, same clothes. But the man in the mirror was smiling, and behind him, the house was on fire. Flames licked the ceiling, smoke poured down the stairs, but the man in the mirror stood calmly, proudly. Then he raised his hand, and so did Thomas, without intending to, and that's when he saw the brand. On his palm, a symbol burned deep. A house, wrapped in a spiral, like it had no end. He stumbled backward, heart slamming, and turned to run, but tripped on something soft, a body. He looked down. Alina Cho from the folder in the attic, now real, now dead, eyes wide open, mouth full of ash, and scrambled back and saw another, and another. Dozens, lying in rows, perfectly spaced, like they were being preserved, like the house was keeping them, and they were all from the attic folders. He wasn't just seeing ghosts. He was walking through a graveyard built inside the walls. He climbed over them, sick, shaking, and somewhere in the distance, the house sighed, not groaned, not creaked, sighed, like it was satisfied. Thomas collapsed in the sitting room, next to the fireplace that never worked. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, but when he opened them again, the room was full. People stood shoulder to shoulder, watching him, all silent, all wrong. Too many eyes, too few mouths, some blurry around the edges, like they hadn't been fully imagined yet. And at the center, the little girl. Isabel. She stepped forward. "You're almost done," she whispered. Thomas shook his head. "Done with what?" She tilted her head. "You're the last room?" He didn't understand. But then he felt it. His hands, his arms, becoming lines, not bones, blueprints. He tore his sleeve back. Ink, spreading, growing. He was being drawn. The house was using him to build, to make more space, to remember more lies, to write more people into itself. "I didn't sign," he said, gasping. "You did," she said, and she held up the paper, his name, inked, not at the bottom, at the top. "I'm not a buyer," she said. "I'm the house." The lights went out, the walls breathed, the house folded, and Thomas disappeared. Only the ink remained. On a fresh page. Waiting. The house had no windows anymore. That was the first thing Lily noticed when she stepped across the threshold. There had been windows when they bought it. Wide ones. Floor to ceiling in the living room, stained glass in the stairwell. She remembered the way the sunlight caught the dust in the late afternoon, like gold snow. But now, nothing. Just solid walls, thick, breathing, listening. Her husband was supposed to be here, but the house gave her no welcome, no warmth, just stillness, soaked in the scent of forgotten wood and iron filings. She called out, "Thomas." No answer, not even echoes, but she swore she heard footsteps upstairs, and music, soft, familiar. A lullaby her grandmother used to hum while brushing her hair. She followed it. Up the stairs. They creaked, but not beneath her weight, beneath the memory of someone else's. Like the wood remembered a rhythm she didn't know. On the landing, the wallpaper curled like old parchment. She reached out to touch it and felt skin. Warm, pulse, throbbing. She yanked her hand back and the wallpaper curled tighter, as if embarrassed. She walked quickly past it. The hallway was longer than she remembered. Too long. Impossible, even for a mansion. It didn't curve or turn. It just extended like it was watching her measure her own disbelief. Each door was numbered. Not sequentially, not logically. She passed. Room 2, room 99, room D, room Teeth, room 4. She stopped at room Thomas. The plaque was carved into the wood. No lock, no knob. Just a slit at eye level. She bent to look in. Darkness. Then, a flash. A face. His face. But twisted, puffy. Swollen with ink. His eyes had no whites. Only lines, like blueprints run wild. He screamed, but no sound came through the slit. She stumbled back, and the door breathed in, as if inhaling her fear. Then the slit vanished, replaced with her own name, Room Lily. The door clicked open, only she hadn't touched it. Inside, the room was blank. No bed, no furniture. Just 4 walls and a floor, all white, too white. And in the center, a chair, bolted down, with a stack of papers on it. She stepped in. The door shut behind her, locking with a sound she felt in her teeth. She turned slowly, reached for the papers. The top page had her name on it, and underneath, a title, Blueprint for Assimilation, Entry Candidate, Fay 21707. She flipped to the next page. A list, not of furniture, not of amenities, a catalog of memories. First time you lied to your mother, age 6, Stolen lipstick from department store. Age 13E chose silence over saying, I'm sorry. Age 28 dream about a house with too many stairs. Recurring dream about the girl in the mirror who whispers your name backward. She kept reading. The pages turned themselves. More memories. Some not hers. Some she didn't think were hers. But they felt like hers the longer she stared. And on the last page, status incomplete. Subject must be broken to fit. The floor opened beneath her. She fell, not far. Just far enough to lose direction. She landed in water. Thick, warm, ink. It soaked her clothes, crawled up her arms. It whispered names she'd never said aloud. And on the far shore, someone waited. Thomas. But wrong. Bent. Hollow. Skin like tracing paper. He smiled and reached for her. You're here? He said. You can help me finish it. Finish what? She gasped, coughing ink. The house, he said. It needs more. More what? He tilted his head. More you. She tried to run, but the floor beneath the ink rippled, hardened, became a staircase, a spiral endless, and she climbed, because it was that or drown. Each step pressed against her memories, pulling her father's voice. The smell of rosemary on her first kiss. The song she never finished writing. Her hatred of confined spaces, her secret joy in being lost. She reached the top. A room again. But this one was different. It had windows. They looked out onto nothing. Just dark shapes moving like fish beneath glass. A mirror stood in the center. She walked toward it. This time the reflection was honest. She looked exactly like herself. Only, her eyes were blue. She didn't have blue eyes. They'd always been brown. She leaned closer. The mirror whispered, "No, you do." And the glass fractured. Behind it, a door. Marked with a symbol, a spiral inside a house. She touched the handle. The house spoke, not with words, with memory, with feeling. It didn't want her to leave, but it also didn't want to keep her. It wanted to use her. Turn her into another room, another story, another lie. She stepped back, refused. The door pulsed, and the house screamed. The ceiling cracked, the floor split. Figures poured out of the walls. Ink-wrapped people, half-drawn, muttering blueprints through torn mouths. They surrounded her, and then she screamed, but not in fear, in resistance. And the mirror behind her shattered. A different light flooded the room, not from inside the house, from outside, a world. Still there, still waiting. She threw herself toward it, and everything snapped. She awoke in the driveway, alone, covered in dust and ink and memories that weren't hers. The house was gone, completely. No rubble, no debris, just grass, flat, untouched, like it had never been there, like it had never existed. In her hand, a folded piece of paper. She opened it, one line. We only build with the lost. They never found Thomas. Not officially. After Lily emerged, half, mad, soaked in black fluid, mumbling about staircases and teeth, they chalked it up to grief and delusion. Trauma manifesting as hallucination. A house that had never existed. Disappearing while she was inside. Impossible. She must have wandered into the woods, they said. Banged her head. Imagined it all. The lot where the house had stood was declared vacant. Again. Because that part wasn't new. Records showed it had been vacant for over 70 years. No permits. No construction. No deed. But that was a lie. It had always been there. To the right eyes. The wrong minds. And Thomas was still inside it. He hadn't meant to stay. When the spiral door first opened for him, he thought it was part of the design. Some architectural flourish he'd overlooked. The hallway had kept stretching. The blueprints kept changing. But he was determined. Obsessed, even. He had stopped sleeping. Stopped calling Lily back. Every time he tried to leave the house, he found himself back in the same room. Sometimes a different version of the same room. Once, it had no ceiling. Another time, the door led directly into a second version of himself, slumped over a drafting table, muttering about load, bearing memory. Eventually, he stopped fighting it. He sat. He drew. The paper never ran out, the pencil never dulled, and the house whispered instructions. So clear, so vivid. Draw what you remember. He did. He sketched the house from childhood, the one with the damp basement and the oil tank that throbbed at night. He drew the hotel he stayed in the weekend his father died, where the mirror never reflected his luggage. He drew the dream apartment he'd never seen, but always knew the layout of. And then he began to draw rooms that didn't exist yet. Rooms full of teeth, of mouths on the floor, whispering blueprints, of staircases that turned into veins. And the more he drew, the more the house shifted, accommodated, approved, until it began to speak in a new way. Not whispers, not creaks, but through the walls themselves, and through her. She didn't have a name, at first, not a real one. He thought she was part of the house, maybe a memory, maybe an idea. She arrived in room 11, backwards, tall, liminal. Her face was always slightly wrong. Like someone had painted a portrait over an older portrait, and both were bleeding through. "You're the architect," she said, smiling with a mouth too wide. "No," he said. "I just draw." She circled him, her steps making no sound. "But they draw through you. That's what makes you useful." "Who's they?" "The house." He laughed then. Laughed until he cried. She didn't blink, didn't look away. She simply said, "It's lonely, being unfinished." That stopped him, because he was unfinished too. Had always felt that way, like something vital had been left off the plans. Like his bones weren't meant for this world. He followed her. Deep, deeper. They passed doors that breathed. Rooms that aged him when he stepped inside, and reversed it when he stepped out. He watched as she peeled skin off memories and pinned them to the walls. "I'm the keeper," she explained. "Off the leftovers." He asked her what that meant. She showed him. A room full of duplicate toothbrushes. The same brand, worn in the same way, but each from a different person. "I keep what they forget," she said. "What they give up to stay here." And he finally understood. The house didn't take people. It made offers. And some people, like him, were already halfway gone. He remembered Lily, her face, her voice, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she smelled like oranges and dryer sheets. He remembered all of it, but it didn't hurt to remember. That scared him. When he tried to draw her, the lines refused to stay straight. She'd come looking for him. Of course she had. But by then, he'd already signed. Not on paper, not with ink, but with absence, with the space he left behind when he stopped trying to return, and so the house began drawing her too. One room at a time. "Do you want her to stay?" The woman asked him, gently, the way you ask someone if they'd like the good drugs before surgery. "No," he said. "She deserves to leave, but she's already in the plans." He looked at the table, and saw it room Lily, windowless, soundproof, absorption, rated, meant for remembering the house, and only the house. He took the pencil, and he erased it. The woman didn't stop him, but she wept ink from her eyes. "You'll break the foundation," she whispered. Then let it fall. And it did fall, just for a moment, just enough for Lily to escape, just enough to cost him his place as architect, but not enough to destroy the house. Because someone else had already taken up the pencil. He didn't see who. Just a figure hunched over the table after him, humming a tune that wasn't music but still moved like it. The woman whispered something to them, and the house healed, and reshaped. And Thomas, he was no longer architect, just a room, a quiet one, forgotten on the second floor, just past the impossible staircase. The plaque outside says, "Room Thomas Null for those who gave too much, and if you ever open that door, if you ever hear the scratching inside, don't answer." Because he's still trying to draw, and he doesn't remember who he's drawing for anymore. The house appeared again in March. Same lot, same rules, no history, no structure on record, but there it stood, plain as brick under sunlight, and this time someone noticed. Not the cops, Not a curious teenager, but a land surveyor. Brian Morelli was a quiet man, detail obsessed. Spent more time with his laser scanner and soil meters than with people. Didn't care about local legends. Didn't believe in ghosts. But he did believe in land. And he'd been measuring it for 15 years. The house wasn't supposed to be there. More than that, it couldn't be. The GPS overlay from just 2 weeks earlier showed an empty lot. Level, flat, unclaimed. Now it read like a black hole on his equipment. No coordinates. Just a blank patch of signal interference, as if the land itself was refusing to be mapped. Brian frowned, adjusted his scanner, switched batteries, even called in to double-check the satellite connection. Everything was fine, except the house. It stood 3 stories tall, a gray-green siding, dark windows. It hummed when he got too close. He circled it 5 times before stepping onto the porch. No creaks, no wind, just stillness and a thin, invisible pressure. Like the moment before a nosebleed, he didn't go inside. Not at first. He recorded the structure with his drone, shot lidar across the roofline, checked the scan. Nothing came back. It was like photographing fog, but worse. The drone froze mid-flight and then disappeared. No crash, no GPS signal loss, just gone. Frame by frame. It blinked out of existence right over the attic window. Brian blinked hard, replayed the footage 5 times. Same result. He should have called it in, filed it under infrastructure anomaly or survey data corruption, but something itched in him. A challenge, an error he had to fix. He pulled a notepad from his back pocket and sketched the outline of the building from memory. Penciled in the angle of the roof, the location of the chimney, the offset of the porch supports. He kept expecting the lines to go crooked, but they didn't. In fact, the more he drew, the more sense it made. Strange design, he murmured. But efficient. The proportions were wrong, intentionally. Not bad architecture, just alien. It was like the house had been designed from the inside out. By the time Brian walked through the front door, the sun had started to dip. He didn't notice. He'd spent the afternoon pacing the perimeter, taking notes, trying to capture measurements that refused to stick. The interior was bone silent. Not just quiet, soundless, like someone had layered padding between the air molecules. The walls were pale blue, the kind of color you forget after seeing it. The floorboards were warm underfoot, not dusty, not decayed. Used. He wasn't alone. He never saw anyone. But as he moved through each hallway, the doors would slowly shift open behind him. He turned once. Swore he saw himself standing at the end of the hall, wearing a different shirt, looking tired, looking afraid. But when he blinked, it was gone. So he did what he always did. He measured. He took out his wheel, his angle finder, his notebook. Room fencing 12 feet by 9 feet. Ceiling 10 feet. Room 29 12 feet by 9 feet. Ceiling 11 feet. Room 30 12 feet by 9 feet. Ceiling 13 feet. Wait, he went back. Checked again. The rooms were identical in shape. No steps. No ramps. But each ceiling was taller than the last. By the time he reached room 6, he couldn't see the ceiling at all. Just darkness, pulsing like a heartbeat. Still, he kept going. He found the survey room next. He knew it was for him, because it was full of unfinished maps, topographic sketches, seismic overlays. Each map was labeled Brian Morelli in neat block letters. But they weren't maps of the land, they were maps of him. Arteries and muscle tissue and bones rendered in elevation contour lines. One showed the shape of his heart as it was at birth. Another showed the fractures in his left wrist from that fall off a ladder when he was 9. A third wasn't labeled at all. Just one word in red ink, BAFTR. He should have left then, but he was a surveyor. He believed in finishing the work. So he opened one last door, the foundation room. It looked like an empty crawl space at first, until he stepped in and realized the beams underfoot were moving, breathing. No, not beams. Ribs. He was standing in the chest cavity of something that used to be a man. And as he looked down, the floor dissolved into a memory, his father, face down in the lake, the water still, but the air screaming. Brian was 6. He'd tried to tell people it wasn't an accident, that the lake had pulled his father down on purpose. No one listened. Until now. The memory ended. The room shifted. And he was no longer standing. He was kneeling, in front of a drafting table, with a pencil in hand, and a floor plan that needed completing. He doesn't come out anymore, but his maps do. Sometimes folded into abandoned mailboxes, sometimes tucked into the glove compartments of strangers' cars. They're always wrong, not by much. Just enough to get you lost. Just enough to send a hiker off trail. Just enough to twist a road the wrong way until you swear you passed that tree 3 times already. Until you reach the end of the path and realize you're back at the house, and it's been waiting. The caretaker, he doesn't remember his name, but he knows how to clean the bloodstains from the staircase. Not with bleach that soaks too deep. You use lemon and coarse salt. Scrub clockwise, never counter. You sing while you do it, quietly. A song you don't remember learning, but your hands move in rhythm to it anyway. He's called the caretaker, not by others, by the house. He doesn't recall when he arrived, or how. Only that when he woke up, the walls whispered instructions, and he obeyed. The house is vast, bigger on the inside, but not in that whimsical, storybook way. More like a tumor that's been growing inward, making more room for itself. Hallways bend and shift. Doors multiply. New staircases spiral from ceilings like veins. It's alive. And the caretaker tends to it like a gardener with a dangerous plant. He oils the hinges so the doors close silently. Sweeps the basement floor so you can't see the claw marks. Dusts the portrait frames, even though none of the faces have eyes anymore. He doesn't ask questions, but sometimes he remembers. Once, he found a pair of boots by the back door, caked in mud, fresh, too small to be his. Next day, he found a broken phone under the kitchen sink, still lit, camera app open. Final photo showed a stairwell, spiraling down forever, taken from an angle that suggested falling. No one ever came to claim the phone. No one ever left it either. That night, the house made a new room. Just beyond the pantry, it didn't have a door. Just a tight, dark entrance like the throat of a cave. Inside, the caretaker found a mirror. His face stared back at him. Only, it wasn't his. Not exactly. The face in the mirror looked younger, frantic. Like a man who was still trying to escape something he hadn't yet seen. Then the mirror shattered, from the inside. The house feeds on moments. It doesn't want you all at once. It wants your memories first, your habits, your rhythms. That's what the caretaker is for. He sets the table for 5 every night, even when there's no one coming. He wins the grandfather clock, even though its hands spin backward. He lights the attic lamp at 3:33 a.m. Sharp, because if he doesn't, something in the walls stirs and starts whispering in a voice that sounds like his mother's. She's been dead for decades. Or maybe she's in room 214. Hard to say. The numbers shift. One morning, he woke up in the nursery. A crib sat in the corner, dustless, as if just used. Inside was a piece of paper folded like a fortune cookie message. It read, "You were never supposed to stay." He wept. Didn't know why, until the house creaked, low, mournful. A kind of apology. Or maybe a warning. That's when he remembered the first time he came here. He'd been part of a search team, looking for someone who went missing on a hike. A girl. Bright jacket. They found her backpack, never found her, but they did find a house that wasn't on the map. The others said it was just a shed. Condemned. Not worth checking. But he knocked on the door anyway, and it opened for him. Of course it did. It had been waiting. Now, he tends the place, keeps the walls from cracking, burns the damp books so their stories don't leak into the air. He hums lullabies to the shadows when they get restless. The house is always hungry. But if you feed it right, small bites, Little memories, nothing too precious. It stays quiet. Mostly. Last week, he found something under the floorboards. Not bones, not teeth, a journal, his own. Though he doesn't remember writing it. The entries start normal, rational. Notes about architecture, temperature readings, sound anomalies. Then, slowly, the handwriting gets messier. More frantic. Until the last page, where it just says, "I think I've been here before. I think I never left. I think I'm not me anymore." He closes the book, places it on the mantel, then goes back to sweeping. Because that's what he's supposed to do. Because that's all he knows how to do. For now. The staircase never ends. It loops, curls, doubles back on itself until the wood seems to stretch into eternity. Even the walls bend at impossible angles, their dark, varnished surfaces always just a little too smooth, too polished, as though waiting for a hand that never comes. For years, the caretaker has walked the halls of this house, maintaining it with reverence and a strange sense of duty. But the further he ventures, the more he begins to question what's at the heart of it all. What does it want from him? What is it, really, asking of him? He should know. He's the one who keeps the rooms clean. He's the one who sweeps the dust away and tightens the hinges, ensuring that the house is never left to fall apart. But there's one room that he avoids, no matter how many times his eyes are drawn to its closed door, locked and chained, as if it knows what he fears. The door at the bottom of the stairs. It was there the first time he entered the house. That door, now hidden behind layers of forgotten cobwebs, was not like the others. The other doors could be opened with a creak or a sigh, but this one. This door didn't yield so easily. It was a heavy door, a massive slab of wood, almost as if it were built specifically to block any intruder. The first time he tried to open it, the air grew heavier. He remembers the way his heart pounded in his chest, like the thrum of a drum, and how his hands trembled as they gripped the cold metal knob. It wouldn't turn. He tugged, he pushed, he pulled. Nothing. Over time, it became clear that the door had a purpose beyond keeping him from exploring. It wasn't just a physical barrier, it changed the air around it. The house seemed to know when he was near. The walls would creak under an invisible weight, the floorboards groaning in protest, as if warning him to turn away. The house didn't want him to know what was on the other side. But still, the caretaker couldn't stop himself from trying to find out. One night, it was raining and the house felt different. More alive, more aware. The storm outside rattled the windows, and somewhere, deep in the foundation, there was the faint sound of something moving. The caretaker stood at the foot of the stairs, staring at the door, a strange pull tugging at his chest. He'd heard whispers. Faint, fleeting. Always at the edge of his hearing, like distant thoughts that danced on the edge of consciousness. He had never been able to make out the words, but the meaning. That he knew the house wanted him to go down, to open the door. The pull grew stronger. Without thinking, he moved toward it. His hand reached for the knob. It was ice cold. The moment his fingers touched the metal, a chill ran up his arm and twisted deep into his bones. The house sighed, long and heavy, as though it was exhaling something trapped inside for far too long. He twisted the knob. The door didn't open. But this time, it felt different. The air around it pulsed, faintly at first, then with increasing urgency. The caretaker stepped back, and that's when he saw it. In the dim light, the edges of the door began to shimmer. The wood warped, as if something was pushing against it from the other side. It was subtle at first, like the swell of a bruise under skin, but it quickly became more pronounced, until the door began to pulse with a rhythmic energy. A soft sound, like whispers, a faint, familiar voice, echoing through the walls. You can't go back now. For a long moment, the caretaker stood frozen, staring at the door as the whispers faded and the pulse died down. His hand still hovered by the knob, the cold metal pressing against his fingertips. There was no going back. He felt it. Felt the weight of it on his shoulders. The house knew. The house always knew. He forced himself to turn away. He wouldn't open that door. Not yet. The journey downward was not something he was ready for. But that night, as he walked the familiar, endless halls, something gnawed at him. He tried to distract himself, replacing light bulbs in the dim hallways, dusting forgotten trinkets on the mantels, sweeping up another endless layer of dust from the old hardwood floors. But there was no escaping the feeling that something was different. There was a new door now. It had appeared out of nowhere, a thin, almost invisible sliver of a door that hadn't been there before. At the farthest end of a hall, just beyond the sitting room, next to the abandoned, cracked window. It called to him. He hesitated, his hand hovering before it, much like it had hovered over the knob of the door at the bottom of the stairs. What was waiting behind this new door? He didn't want to know. But the house did, and that was enough. He reached for the door. It opened with a quiet creak, the sound too loud in the dead silence of the house. Beyond it lay a narrow corridor, lit dimly by the faintest light that seemed to flicker and fade at the edges. No, he shouldn't be here. He needed to turn around, go back upstairs, but his feet were moving. It was like they had a mind of their own. His steps were heavy, the sound of them echoing louder with each step. The house seemed to grow quieter, the whispers diminishing as if it was holding its breath. The hallway twisted and narrowed. The walls pressed in tighter with each step, until there was no turning back. The air was thick, suffocating. He thought he could hear something breathing, something that wasn't quite human, not quite animal, but something in between. And then, at the very end of the corridor, he saw it. A door. But this one was different from the others. It was black. Not dark, not just a shadow. Black. The kind of black that made the walls fade away, the kind that felt like it was pulling the very light from the air. It was waiting. For him. The caretaker stood before the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the knob. Behind him, the house shifted. A low groan rattled the walls. A voice whispered in his ear, and he stepped forward. The air in front of the door was colder than it had been before. A bone, deep chill that seemed to seep into his skin and rattle his bones. The caretaker's hand hovered just an inch from the blackened knob, the faintest of tremors running through his fingertips. He should turn back. He should forget this path that led into the heart of the house. But something inside him, something twisted and hungry, compelled him forward. The house was calling him, and he could no longer deny it. As his fingers closed around the cold metal, a strange pressure settled in his chest. The silence was absolute, as though the entire house had held its breath, waiting for him to open the door. The moment he touched the knob, it felt alive. The metal beneath his palms seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat from deep within the house itself. It didn't turn. For a moment, he stood frozen in front of it, wondering if this was the end of the road. His pulse hammered in his ears, and the faintest sound of whispers, too far to make out, crept from the edges of his hearing, growing louder, more urgent. Then the door began to move, not by his hand, but as if something on the other side had pushed it open. The wood creaked and groaned, the hinges protesting as they were forced into motion. The room beyond was darker than the shadows of the hall, and the air seemed to thicken, pressing down on him. A smell, stale and faded, like old books and rotting wood, wafted toward him. A room frozen in time. A room that wasn't meant to be found. He stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him, as though the house were locking him in. The dim flickering light from the hallway vanished, and for a moment, the caretaker was engulfed in complete darkness. He stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to the house breathe around him. Then, as if in answer to his stillness, a faint glow began to appear in the far corner of the room. It was pale, faint, and flickering like a candle struggling against a draft. He stepped toward it. The room was cluttered with dust and decay. Papers, old, yellowed, littered the floor, the remnants of some forgotten study or forgotten purpose. A desk, a chair, broken bookshelves filled with books that had long since lost their words. But it wasn't the furniture that caught his attention. It was what lay against the far wall. A mirror. At first, it seemed like any ordinary mirror, hung in the shadows, reflecting only what was before it, dust and decay. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw something strange. The reflection didn't match reality. Where he stood, at the center of the room, the mirror showed him standing farther away, closer to the edge of the room. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. It was still there. His reflection stood, still and unmoving, in the far corner of the room. But there was something else, something wrong about it. The face in the reflection was twisted. His features, though identical to his own, were contorted, stretched unnaturally, as if someone had grabbed his face and pulled it into a grotesque parody of itself. And then it grinned. The reflection grinned. The caretaker's heart stopped. He stumbled back, breath catching in his throat, eyes wide in panic as the twisted face in the mirror, his own face, smiled. A smile that wasn't his. A smile filled with malice, as if the mirror had come alive to mock him. A laugh echoed from the darkness, soft but growing louder, like the echoes of a memory he couldn't place. The caretaker's hands went clammy as he took a step back, then another. His gaze never left the mirror. He wanted to look away, but his body refused. Something was keeping him there. Something was anchoring him to that reflection. "You think you can escape?" The voice whispered, soft, coaxing, as if it were trying to soothe him. "You think you can leave this place?" The caretaker's breath quickened. He was trapped. No matter how far he walked in this house, it would always pull him back to this moment, to this door, to the reflection. The voice in the mirror, his voice, continued, slow and taunting. "You were always meant to stay." Suddenly, the caretaker was not alone. The darkness in the room seemed to shift, as if something was crawling out from it, growing around him. Shadows reached out from the corners of the room, thick and impenetrable, like hands pulling at his very soul. The caretaker staggered backward, finally tearing his eyes away from the mirror. He stumbled into something solid, a chair, a desk, anything to keep him grounded in reality. His mind spun, fighting to make sense of what was happening. There was no escape. The house would never let him go. His mind raced. The door at the top of the stairs. He'd been there before, but it was locked. And yet that door had always been an option, a faint possibility. But now, this mirror, this dark room, was all there was. The house had swallowed him whole, and he was just one more lost soul trapped in its shifting halls. As his panic rose, the reflection in the mirror shifted. His distorted face began to move, its eyes glowing now, and the grin stretching wider, darker, as if the thing in the mirror was trying to crawl out. "You belong to me now," the reflection said, its voice thick and low, like something crawling from the depths of the earth. "You'll never leave." The caretaker's hand trembled as it gripped the chair beside him. He felt the warmth of his fingers against the wood, grounding him. He had to think. There had to be a way out. He wasn't going to let the house take him, not like this. Not after everything he'd been through. But just as the last of his resolve began to form, the floor beneath him shuddered. The house was alive, and it was waking up. The whispers from the house returned, louder now, reverberating off the walls. The air grew colder, the shadows thicker. The caretaker knew, deep in his gut, that something was coming for him. Something terrible, something hungry. But it was more than that. He could feel it now, the presence from the other side of the mirror. It wasn't just a reflection. It was watching him, waiting. The walls trembled, And then the door slammed open. Was it the same door? He didn't know. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the sound of footsteps coming closer. The caretaker barely had time to react as the door burst open. It felt like a sudden release of pressure, like a breath he didn't even know he was holding. The room around him seemed to shift, the walls pulling inward as though the house itself was closing in. The echo of footsteps grew louder, closer, as if something, or someone, was approaching from the other side. He didn't look back at the mirror. He couldn't. The thing behind him was no longer just a reflection. It had become something real, something that wasn't bound by glass or light. It was the house itself. It was the thing that had been pulling him toward it from the very beginning. But it wasn't just a reflection. It was a voice that belonged to the house. The footsteps grew louder still, now unmistakable, and the caretaker's heart raced in his chest. A wave of panic surged over him. The house had done something. It had changed him, changed the very air. There was something here, something he could feel but not see. His legs moved before his mind could catch up. He had to get away. He had to escape. But as he moved toward the open door, the shadows in the room seemed to pulse, twisting and stretching as if alive. The air was thick, and it pulled at him, pulling him back toward the mirror, toward the door, toward them. The footsteps reached him, the echo growing louder until it was no longer a sound in the distance, but one that rang inside his very skull. The presence in the room. It wasn't just near him anymore. It was inside him. A cold hand brushed against his shoulder, and the caretaker's breath caught in his throat. The house was alive. He was no longer sure what was real and what was part of the nightmare. The doorway to the next room wasn't just a passage. It was a trap. The black door, the mirror, the footsteps. They were all connected, one unending chain that led deeper into the house. A voice, his voice, whispered from the darkness, "You can't escape me." It was the house speaking, and it knew everything about him, every secret, every fear, every flaw. For the first time since stepping into the house, the caretaker felt true terror. He was powerless here. The walls were closing in, the floor beneath him shifting as if it were made of water. And the footsteps, they weren't just footsteps anymore. They were something else, something that watched him. He spun around, but there was nothing behind him. Just the door, wide open, offering only the unknown. And that was when he saw it. The room was no longer the same. What had once been a forgotten study, a room lost in time, was now a vast, hollow space, a cavern. The walls stretched impossibly high above him, and the shadows clung to every surface, swallowing the light whole. The air was suffocating, the darkness oppressive, and in the center of the room, suspended in midair, was a hole, a dark, gaping hole that seemed to pull the very light from the room. The longer he stared at it, the more he felt himself being drawn to it, pulled into its depths. He didn't want to move closer. He knew, that whatever waited in that hole was not something to face. Yet his body moved against his will. One step, then another, the voice returned. "Come closer." He could hear it now, the faintest sound coming from within the hole. It wasn't just a sound. It was a voice, low and rumbling, like the growl of something ancient. Something that had been waiting for him. It was calling him. The caretaker stumbled, his feet dragging across the uneven floor. He couldn't stop. His body was betraying him. His head screamed at him to turn, to run, to escape, but his legs carried him forward, step after step. As he moved closer to the hole, the air grew colder, more suffocating. The walls around him seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, the shadows thickening and bending. Every breath he took felt harder, as if the house was trying to choke the life out of him, to suffocate him in its grip. "Come closer." The voice repeated, its tone now pleading, as if it were a lover trying to lure him into its embrace. But there was nothing gentle about it. It was a trap. He reached the edge of the hole, his feet standing at its precipice. And in that moment, the caretaker's heart froze in his chest. The hole wasn't empty. It wasn't a void. It was filled with eyes. Dozens, hundreds of eyes. Eyes that blinked and stared at him from the darkness. The hole wasn't just a hole. It was watching him. He stepped back, but his feet couldn't seem to find purchase on the floor. The shadows reached out to him, grasping at his legs, pulling him in. He could feel them like cold hands around his ankles, dragging him toward the darkness. The voice, it wasn't just speaking anymore. It was screaming. The walls trembled as if the house were shaking in rage. The echo of that sound filled his ears, drowning out everything else. And then, as if to seal his fate, the hole shifted. The eyes blinked one by one, and a figure began to emerge from within the depths. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its body obscured by shadow. But the eyes were the worst part. They stared at him. No. Through him, as though it could see every part of his soul. The caretaker couldn't move. His legs were frozen in place, his body locked by fear. Every instinct told him to run, to flee. But his feet were like stone, rooted to the ground. And then it spoke. You should never have come here. The voice wasn't the house's anymore. It wasn't the caretaker's. It was something older, something hungry. The figure stepped forward, its footfall sending a tremor through the house. The air grew colder, colder than he had ever felt, until his breath was visible in front of him. The shadows around him thickened, closing in, trapping him. And the eyes, those damned eyes, they stared at him, unblinking. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run. But as the figure took another step, a strange force swept through him, forcing him to his knees. The last thing he saw was the eyes, countless eyes, staring back at him as he was dragged into the darkness. The darkness was suffocating. The caretaker's breath was the only thing he could hear, shallow and panicked, as the shadows pressed against him. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the house itself were trying to choke the life from him. His hands clawed at the floor beneath him, but there was no ground, no surface. Only the weight of the void, dragging him deeper. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, that this could all be some twisted hallucination. The eyes, the voice, the figure, none of it felt real, but his pulse hammered in his ears. The pain in his chest, the stifling air, it was real. It was happening, and he was losing himself to it. He fought to breathe, his throat closing up as if the house itself were tightening its grip on him. He tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. The shadows twisted around him, coiling like serpents, dragging him further down into the abyss. His legs kicked out, but there was no escape, no release. For a split second, he thought of the door, the open door he had run from earlier. He thought of the world beyond the house, of freedom, of safety. But even as that thought crossed his mind, he knew it was pointless. He was trapped. He had been trapped from the very beginning. And then the voice returned. You cannot leave. It was not the voice of the house, but of the thing that lurked within it. That ancient, hungry presence that had been waiting for him all this time. It wasn't just an entity. It was the essence of the house itself. The very heart of the nightmare. You cannot escape. The caretaker's body trembled, his hands curling into fists as the voice filled his mind. He wanted to fight it, to tear it apart, but how? How could he fight something that wasn't real? Something that wasn't bound by the laws of the world. The shadows twisted again, and in the blink of an eye, the caretaker was no longer on the ground. He was standing in the center of an endless, shifting labyrinth, its walls alive with movement. The paths were indistinct, constantly changing, shifting like liquid. The labyrinth seemed to stretch out forever, a maze with no beginning and no end. The air was thick with whispers, distant voices calling his name, begging him to come closer. The walls seemed to pulse with life, the very stones of the labyrinth moving, closing in on him. There was no escape, no way out. The caretaker's heart raced. He could feel the pressure of the house bearing down on him, its weight like 1,000 tons pressing in from every side. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He was caught in the house's grip, and it was suffocating him. "You will stay here," the voice whispered. "You will never leave." The caretaker's eyes darted around. The walls were closing in faster now, the floor beneath him trembling as though the entire house was alive. He was running out of time. Think! 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 There had to be a way out. There had to be a reason the house had brought him here, had trapped him in its depths. Was this the end? But no. He couldn't accept that. Not yet. Not after everything he had endured. The house had already taken so much from him, but it would not take this. His will, his life, his freedom. Not without a fight. His breath was ragged, but determination started to rise within him. He wasn't done yet. There had to be a way out. The house may be endless, but it was also fragile. Its walls, its foundations. They were not invincible. The air began to hum around him, the whispers of the labyrinth growing louder, more insistent. He closed his eyes, blocking out the noise, trying to focus. The voice was all around him now, its words sinking into his skin, into his bones. But something had shifted. He could feel it now. The house wasn't as solid as it seemed. It was like a cage, built on a foundation of lies. The structure, the walls, the floors, the corridors, they were constructed around something. Something that didn't belong. Something unnatural. A shiver ran down his spine. The caretaker opened his eyes and looked around, his gaze sharp, taking in the maze of twisting corridors. In the distance, he saw it. A flicker of light. Barely a glimmer, but it was there. It was a beacon, a promise of something beyond the shadows. A way out. Without thinking, he took a step toward it. The labyrinth groaned as the caretaker moved forward. The walls seemed to warp, bending and twisting, as if trying to prevent him from reaching the light. But he didn't stop. He kept moving, his feet finding the uneven ground beneath him. The shadows were thicker now, darker. But the light, whatever it was, kept calling to him, pulling him forward. Just a little more. His pulse thudded in his chest as he ran. Every footstep seemed to echo in the silence of the labyrinth. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. But he could still hear the faint hum of that light in the distance. It was getting closer. He was getting closer. And then, just as he reached the threshold of the light, the labyrinth collapsed. The walls shattered. The floor crumbled away beneath him, and for a moment he was falling. Falling through nothingness, weightless, his body tumbling through the void. But as the ground rushed up to meet him, he reached out, grabbing onto something real. When his eyes opened again, he was no longer in the labyrinth. He was outside, but not in the way he had expected. The air was cold and crisp, but it was not the world he had once known. It was different. The house stood before him, but its shape was wrong. Twisted, like it had been peeled back, revealing its true form, its true nature. It was no longer the house he had walked into. It was something darker, something ancient. And in the distance, the dark figure loomed. The one that had been calling him, watching him. It was still there, and it was coming closer. The caretaker stood frozen for a moment, his heart hammering in his chest. The house was not finished with him. Not by a long shot. And yet, there was a sliver of hope, a possibility, a chance to make things right. He had escaped the labyrinth, but the true battle was just beginning. The house hadn't let go. It had merely shifted. The caretaker stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had escaped the labyrinth. But it wasn't a victory. No, far from it. The house had only shifted, not released him. The air felt heavier, colder, more oppressive. And the figure, the one that had haunted the labyrinth, was now closer than ever. He could feel its presence, like a weight pressing against his very soul. It was watching him, studying him, and in the distance, the house loomed larger, its shape more twisted, more grotesque than before. The walls seemed to ripple, as though the house itself was alive, breathing. And then, just as quickly, it happened. The ground beneath him trembled, the earth shaking like it had been torn from its roots. The caretaker stumbled, his legs failing him as the world seemed to split open around him. The air crackled with an unseen force, as though some ancient power had been unleashed. The earth itself groaned in protest, and the sky above darkened, swirling into a vortex of shadow. The house, it was changing. The figure was closer now, so close, in fact, that the caretaker could see it clearly. A tall, dark shape, clothed in tattered robes that seemed to absorb the light around them. Its face was obscured, hidden beneath a hood of shadow. But there was something wrong about it. Something unnatural. The air hummed with the energy that radiated from the figure, a vibration that made the caretaker's skin crawl. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. But its presence was undeniable, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to run. But where could he go? The caretaker's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but the land around him was desolate. The house stretched impossibly high into the air, its twisted spires rising like jagged teeth in the black sky. The earth beneath him cracked and shifted, as though it were on the verge of tearing itself apart. The very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling. You cannot run. The voice was like the rustle of dead leaves, low and hollow. It came from all around him, filling the air, pressing against his ears. The caretaker took a step back, his pulse racing. His mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what was happening, of what this thing was. It wasn't just a creature, it was the house. It was the essence of everything this place had become. It was the embodiment of the nightmare that had haunted him, the force that had bound him to this place. And it was reaching out to claim him. You think you can escape. The figure moved, its long, skeletal hand reaching toward the caretaker. Its fingers were like blackened bones, sharp and jagged. But you are mine now. You always were. The caretaker staggered back, his eyes wide with panic. He had to move. He couldn't let this thing touch him. He couldn't let it take him back into the void. No, he shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. I won't let you win. But the figure's grip on the air itself tightened. The ground beneath the caretaker's feet shifted, and he felt himself being pulled forward, toward the thing, toward the house. The more he fought, the stronger the pull became, until his body was no longer his own. And then, in a flash of blinding light, everything stopped. The pressure, the pull, the darkness, it all vanished. In an instant, the caretaker found himself standing at the center of an empty room. It was eerily quiet. He stood in a vast, open space, surrounded by nothing but walls of stone, smooth and featureless. No windows, no doors. Just an endless expanse of stone, stretching out in every direction. The air was still, but it was thick with something else. Something unnerving. The caretaker's breath caught in his throat as he realized where he was. He was inside the house now. The room shifted, and the walls began to pulse with a low, rhythmic hum. The stone seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like the chest of some monstrous creature. The sound grew louder, reverberating through the space, as though the very structure of the house was alive. And then he saw it. At the far side of the room, a figure materialized. No, emerged from the stone. It was a man, or something that had once been a man, his features obscured by shadow. His body was thin and gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over the bones beneath. His eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to draw in the light around him. It was him, the original caretaker. The caretaker's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the figure. The man who had once walked these halls. The man who had been consumed by the house, swallowed whole by the darkness that now surrounded him. You, the caretaker whispered, his voice shaking. You were me. The figure nodded, its face never changing. There was no emotion in its eyes, only an emptiness that went on forever. It was the face of someone who had lost everything, who had given everything to the house. I was you, the figure said, its voice cold and hollow, like the wind through dead trees. And now you are me. The caretaker staggered back, his mind racing. No, I won't become you. I can't. I won't stay here. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling as the walls closed in around him. He could feel the house growing, expanding, suffocating him. It was trying to swallow him whole. You don't have a choice, the figure whispered. You can never leave. Not now. Not after everything you've done. The caretaker's chest tightened. He could feel the house's grip on him growing stronger. He had to fight back. He had to do something. But the house, the very air, was against him. It was relentless. His eyes flicked to the floor, and for the briefest moment, he saw it. The faintest crack in the stone. A line. Faint, but unmistakable. It was the only sign of weakness he had seen since entering the house. And if there was one thing he had learned in all of this, it was that even the strongest walls could crack. With every ounce of strength he could muster, the caretaker ran toward the crack, his body fighting the invisible force that pressed against him. He could feel the walls of the house closing in, could feel the presence of the original caretaker, watching him, waiting for him to fail. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He reached the crack and shoved his hand into it, pushing with all his might. The stone groaned, and for a moment, he thought it would break. And then, it did. The ground beneath him shifted again, and the caretaker felt himself falling once more, but this time, it wasn't into the house. It was into nothing. And as he fell into the abyss, he realized one thing: the house was not just a place. It was a prison, and he was still its prisoner. The fall was endless. The caretaker's body was weightless, his senses suspended in a void where time no longer seemed to exist. The world around him was a blur of darkness and shifting shadows, as though the very fabric of reality had been torn away. He couldn't tell if he was still falling, or if he had already hit the ground. There was no ground, no horizon, only the crushing sensation of emptiness. For a moment, he wondered if this was it, if this was the end, if the house, the thing that had trapped him for so long, had finally won. But then, something shifted. A sound, a low, almost imperceptible hum, broke the silence. It was faint at first, like the distant echo of a heartbeat, but it grew louder, clearer, until it filled his entire being. The sound was almost comforting, like a lullaby, or the whisper of a memory long forgotten. And then there was light. It wasn't a blinding flash, but a soft, dim glow that bathed the caretaker in its eerie warmth. The darkness receded, revealing a vast, empty space. Nothing like the cold, oppressive walls of the house. The floor was smooth and glass, like stretching out in all directions, reflecting the light in an almost surreal way. The air was still, and the sense of pressure that had weighed down on him for so long was gone. He felt free. For the first time since his journey began, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, to let the calmness wash over him. But even as he did, something felt off. There were no doors, no windows, only the infinite space stretching out before him. It was as if he was suspended in the center of nowhere. The hum that had filled the void still echoed, reverberating off the glass like floor, but there was no sign of where it came from. No walls, no boundaries, just an endless, empty expanse. Where am I? The caretaker's voice seemed to echo around him, but it wasn't his voice. It sounded hollow, distant, as if the words weren't entirely his own. Suddenly, the air grew colder. A gust of wind, impossible in such a place, rippled through the space. It carried with it a familiar scent. Dust, decay, the stench of rot. And then he saw it. A figure appeared in the distance, its silhouette barely visible against the shimmering floor. It was tall, thin, and draped in a cloak that billowed around it as if it were caught in an invisible wind. The figure's face was obscured by a hood, but the caretaker could feel its presence. Cold, malevolent, like the eye of a storm. It was the same figure that had haunted him through the labyrinth, the one he had seen at the edges of his mind. The one that had tried to drag him back into the house. It stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring the moment. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, its voice like the scraping of stone against stone. "This place is not for the living." The caretaker's breath caught in his throat. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound calm. "Is this the house?" The figure tilted its head, its hood falling back just enough to reveal a face that was both familiar and alien. The skin was pale, stretched tight over the skull, and the eyes were empty voids. The figure was no longer just a shadow. It was a thing, a presence, an idea. "No," the figure replied, its tone flat and cold. "This is the hollow, the space between all things. The place where the house ends and begins." The caretaker's mind spun. The hollow. Was this some kind of limbo? A place between life and death, between the house and the outside world. "Why am I here?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What is this place?" "You are here because the house wills it." The figure's voice grew darker, more insistent. "It has claimed you, just as it has claimed all those before you. You cannot escape. You cannot leave. This is your fate." The caretaker stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had fought so hard, had gone through so much. How could this be it? "But there has to be a way out," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I can't stay here. I won't." The figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. The air grew colder still, and the hum that filled the space grew louder, almost deafening. "You misunderstand," the figure said, its tone now laced with something like amusement. "The house is not just a structure. It is a force, a presence. It has been here long before you ever set foot inside it, and it will remain long after you are gone." The caretaker felt a chill run through him. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The house was not just a place. It was something else. A thing older than the world itself. A thing that had existed long before him and would continue to exist long after he was nothing but dust. "But I can't be part of it," he said, his voice shaking. "I won't become part of this." The figure's laugh was hollow, echoing through the hollow. "You already are, caretaker. You always have been." The caretaker tried to move, to break free, but the air around him grew thick and heavy, as though invisible chains had wrapped around his limbs. The walls of the hollow began to close in, pressing in on him from all sides. The figure's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the caretaker saw something in those empty voids, something alive. "You belong to it," the figure whispered, its voice soft but full of venom. "You will never escape." The caretaker's heart raced, his breath shallow as the weight of the truth began to sink in. The house was more than just a place. It was a force, an entity, and it had always had a plan for him. He had never truly escaped. He had only been led further into its grasp. With a sudden, violent jerk, the caretaker was pulled backward, his body crashing into the ground. The hollow was gone, replaced by the oppressive darkness of the house once more. And the house, it was waiting. The house was waiting. The caretaker's body ached, each breath feeling heavier than the last as the weight of the darkness pressed in around him. He was back. He didn't know how, but he was back in the house, surrounded by the cold, oppressive walls. There was no hollow now, no strange void where he could feel free for even a moment. The world had returned to the house's crushing embrace. He could hear nothing. No hum. No whispering echoes. just the deafening silence that consumed everything. The air was thick, heavy, as if the house itself were watching him, waiting for something. But there was no escape. There never had been. The caretaker forced himself to his feet, his hands shaking as he braced against the nearest wall. His mind was a blur, spinning with the memory of the figure in the hollow, the one that had called him its own. "You belong to it, you always have." The words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the truth he hadn't wanted to face. He tried to push them away, to deny it, but he couldn't. The house had already claimed him, wrapped its tendrils around his very soul, and there was no escape from the house. Not now. Not ever. He stumbled down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know if there was anywhere left to go. The walls seemed to shift as he moved, narrowing and stretching, twisting the corridors into impossible angles. Each door he passed seemed to mock him, as if daring him to open it. But he couldn't. He couldn't risk it. Every part of the house was a trap. Every step led him deeper into its grip. His fingers brushed against the wooden paneling, feeling the coldness of it beneath his touch. He looked around, desperate for something, anything, that might give him a clue, a way out. But there was nothing. Just the silence, the emptiness, the all-encompassing presence of the house. Suddenly, he froze. From deep within the house, a sound. Soft at first, a creak, then another, and another. It was coming from above him. The ceiling, the attic. The sound was unmistakable. Footsteps. Light, tentative footsteps, like someone, or something, was walking across the floor above him. The caretaker's heart skipped a beat. Who was it? Was it one of the other souls trapped here? Was it someone else who had come before him? He wasn't alone. The sound grew louder, closer. The footsteps were quickening now, almost frantic, as if whatever was up there knew it was being pursued. The caretaker's pulse quickened in turn. He had to know. He had to find out who, or what, was up there. He wasn't going to let this house claim him without a fight. He moved toward the stairs, the old wood creaking under his weight. Every step was slow, deliberate. He didn't know what he expected to find, but he knew one thing for sure: it was not going to be good. At the top of the stairs, the door to the attic loomed in front of him. The handle was cold to the touch, but the caretaker didn't hesitate. He gripped it, turned it, and stepped inside. The attic was vast, filled with dust and cobwebs that clung to the rafters like ghosts. Boxes, old furniture, and forgotten relics were piled high, each item covered in layers of age and neglect. But it wasn't the room that made his stomach tighten. It was the feeling, the sensation of something watching him. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the attic, sitting in the shadows, was a figure, small, hunched, and unmoving. The figure was draped in rags, its face obscured by a tangle of long, matted hair. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It just sat there, staring into the darkness. The caretaker's blood ran cold. This thing. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. He took a tentative step forward, his breath shallow. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" There was no response. The figure just sat, still as stone, its presence more unsettling than anything the caretaker had ever encountered in the house. He stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to know. He had to understand what this place was, and who, or what, was trapped inside it. And then the figure moved. With a sharp, sudden motion, it turned its head toward him. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, and black as night. There was nothing behind them. No soul, no consciousness. Just empty, endless voids. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was low, rasping, like something trying to claw its way out from the depths of a grave. "It will take you too." The caretaker stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. "Take me. What are you talking about?" The figure's lips parted in a slow, grotesque smile. "You can't escape. No one can. It let out a low, raspy chuckle, and the sound sent chills down his spine. You belong to it, just like the rest of us. The caretaker's mind raced. The figure, whatever it was right. He had been warned. He had known deep down that there was no escaping the house. But hearing it from this thing that had been here so long it had become a part of the house itself, it hit him like a punch to the gut. You're not real, he muttered to himself. You're not real. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. The figure didn't respond. It just stared at him with those empty eyes, and the caretaker felt the weight of its gaze on him. The silence stretched on, unbearable and thick, like the air was pressing down on him, forcing the breath from his lungs. And then, with a sudden, violent motion, the figure lunged. It wasn't fast, but the speed at which it moved was unnatural, as if the very laws of physics had been bent. The caretaker barely had time to react, but he knew instinctively that he had no chance of outrunning it. His pulse raced, and a scream caught in his throat as the figure reached for him. But just as it was about to touch him, everything stopped. The figure froze in mid-motion, suspended in the air as if time itself had come to a halt. The caretaker blinked, his heart still hammering in his chest. What was happening? Was it the house again? Was it playing with him? And then, the voice, the familiar, oppressive voice of the house, the one that had haunted him from the beginning. It whispered, soft yet piercing, in the back of his mind. You have come too far, caretaker. There is no way back now. The caretaker's body went cold as the words filled his mind. The weight of them, the certainty behind them, left no room for doubt. He had been right all along. There was no escape. And now, the house was going to take him too. The caretaker stood frozen, unable to comprehend the words that had just echoed in his mind. You have come too far. There is no way back now. The voice, smooth and cold, wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its certainty. The figure in the attic, suspended in midair, continued to stare at him with its hollow, black eyes. It was as if time itself had stalled, leaving them both suspended in a moment where the rules of reality no longer applied. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat louder than the next. The house, it was toying with him again. No, this wasn't a game. This was the final warning. He tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, almost too heavy to draw into his lungs. His mind was racing. Escape, escape, escape. But where? How? His eyes darted around the attic, searching for something, anything, that could offer him an out. The old boxes, the forgotten furniture, all of it was silent. There was nothing to help him, nothing to stop the house from taking him just as it had taken the others. And then, with a slow, sickening certainty, the figure's lips curled into a smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a grin of pure malice, the kind that sent a chill down the spine and twisted the stomach. You've heard the truth now, caretaker. The figure rasped, its voice low and gravelly, each word like an echo from the depths of an eternal nightmare. The house has claimed you. It owns you, and there is no way out, no salvation. You are here forever. The caretaker's mind raced. No. He refused to believe it. He couldn't let this be the end. He couldn't let the house win. But before he could react, the figure jerked its head to the side, as if listening to something beyond the walls. A strange, almost imperceptible shift seemed to happen in the room. The shadows deepened, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards and walls. It was a sound he had heard before, the unsettling hum that seemed to echo from the very heart of the house. The figure in front of him shuddered, its limbs twitching as though something were pulling at it from within. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it spoke again. The hollow, it calls to you. The caretaker's blood ran cold. He had heard of the hollow, the dark, empty place that seemed to exist outside of the house's normal boundaries. the place where the house's darkest secrets resided. It was a place of forgotten souls, of those who had been consumed and lost to the house's hunger. But why was the figure telling him this? What did it mean by the hollow calls to you? The air around him seemed to shift, thickening with an unseen presence. The shadows writhed, stretching unnaturally as though the very fabric of the room was bending. The house wasn't just alive. It was aware. It was watching him, waiting for him to make the next move, waiting for him to take the next step. A sudden sound, a low scraping, like claws dragging across wood, came from behind him. The caretaker spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the emptiness of the attic stretching out into the dark. Then, from the corner of his vision, something moved. He whirled back, and for a split second, he thought he saw a flash of movement, a shape darting behind one of the old boxes, but when he focused on it, there was nothing. No movement, no shape. He could feel it now, though, an unnatural presence. Something was in the attic with him, something that had been here far longer than he could comprehend. A shudder ran through him as his mind wandered to the hollow once again. The house had drawn him here, to this place, for a reason. It wanted something from him. It wanted him to give in, to surrender to the pull of the hollow. But there was a part of him, deep down, that still resisted. There had to be another way. He couldn't just give up. He had seen it before. The pattern. The way the house twisted its victims into something they were not. How it made them forget who they were, who they had been. It had taken countless souls over the years, twisting them, bending them until they became part of the house's insidious design. He had to break free. He backed away from the suspended figure, his heart pounding in his chest. The walls of the attic seemed to close in on him, the shadows growing thicker, more oppressive. The air was suffocating, thick with a sense of inevitability. He needed to find the hollow. He had no choice. If he didn't, the house would claim him, just as it had claimed the others, and the others had been lost forever. But the hollow was no place for a man to go willingly. It was a place where the rules of life and death ceased to matter. It was a place where time, space, and reason were distorted beyond recognition. And yet, the house had already shown him that there were no other choices. The hollow was the only answer. His feet moved without thought, carrying him toward the narrow staircase that led to the lower levels of the house. He had no plan, no clear path. But the house seemed to guide him, pulling him toward the deep, twisted heart of its existence. The air grew colder as he descended. The walls seemed to lean in, watching him as he passed, and the further he went, the more he could feel it. The weight of something ancient, something buried beneath the house's foundations. The hollow. He reached the bottom of the stairs, and before him stood a door. It was different from the others, old, weathered, and covered in thick layers of dust. A door that he had never seen before, but one that called to him with an undeniable force. With shaking hands, the caretaker reached for the handle. His fingers brushed against the cold metal, and a sudden jolt of energy ran through him, like a surge of electricity, sparking through his very bones. It was time. He pushed the door open, and then he stepped into the darkness. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a void that seemed to swallow all light. The air was colder now, the chill creeping into his bones as though the very atmosphere had frozen. The caretaker stood at the threshold, unable to see anything but darkness. But it was not an empty kind of dark. No, this was a deep, oppressive dark that seemed to have weight. A dark that wanted him to step inside. He hesitated. His hand still rested on the doorframe, as if to anchor himself to the known, to the safety of the house that had become his prison. But something pushed him forward. The house was no longer just a place, it was a presence. A living entity that whispered his name, calling him deeper. And so, he stepped in. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the world around him shifted. The air thickened, pressing against his chest like 100 invisible hands. He felt his breath become shallow, his heartbeat quickening as he was drawn deeper into the darkness. His feet moved on their own, guided by some unseen force, as if the very floor was pulling him. It was a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He had been inside the house countless times, but this was something different. This was something far older, far more ancient. The darkness swirled around him, alive with whispers, soft at first, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct, as though they were speaking directly to him, taunting him, urging him to go further. "You know what lies ahead," they said. "You know what you must do." The caretaker's stomach churned. He wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the familiar hallways. But the pull was irresistible. Every step he took seemed to pull him closer to the center of this unnatural place. The floor beneath him began to shift, the wooden planks groaning in protest as though the house itself was waking from a long slumber. The walls seemed to close in, warping, bending, their surfaces pulsating with a faint glow. It was as if the very architecture of the house was being rewritten, its bones twisting in ways that defied logic. And then, ahead, something appeared. A faint light, flickering like a candle in the distance, shone through the thick fog. It was faint, distant, but it was there. He couldn't tell what it was, but something in him urged him forward. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. He had to go toward it. He had no choice. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing in the vast emptiness around him. The farther he walked, the more the air seemed to hum, vibrating with an unnatural energy. It was as though the entire space was alive, breathing in sync with his every move. The light grew brighter as he drew nearer. It was not a light he recognized, flickering and unstable, like something alive and consuming. But still, he pressed on. And then he saw it. It wasn't a candle. It was a figure, standing in the center of the room, bathed in the eerie glow of its own existence. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its face obscured by a hood that seemed to ripple and shift like liquid smoke. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its presence radiated an aura of ancient power. But it wasn't human. The figure's head tilted slightly, as though acknowledging his presence. And then, in a voice that sent shivers down his spine, it spoke. "You have come far, caretaker." The words were soft, yet they rang in his ears like a thunderclap. The caretaker froze, his pulse pounding in his neck. He had heard stories of figures like this, of ancient entities bound to the house, of guardians who protected the secrets of the hollow. But he had never imagined he would stand face to face with one of them. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking despite himself. The figure's lips, hidden beneath the hood, curled into something resembling a smile. But it wasn't a smile meant to comfort. It was a smile that radiated the kind of cold that made the caretaker's skin crawl. "I am what remains," the figure intoned, its voice like the rasp of dry leaves. "What the house has forgotten, I am the last keeper of its true nature. The thing that was buried long ago, when the house was still young." The caretaker's mind raced. The house had forgotten something. Forgotten what? "You think you understand," the figure continued, its voice twisting into something more sinister, more guttural. "But you know nothing. You've only seen the surface, the illusions. There is a hunger beneath it all, a hunger that cannot be sated. It has been growing for centuries, and now it wants you." The caretaker's heart pounded in his chest. The house it had been feeding. Feeding on what? Souls? Lives? "It's too late," the figure whispered, as if reading his thoughts. "The house is changing. It has been remade in your image. You are the one who will fulfill its needs, who will give it what it craves. And when you do, the hollow will consume you, just as it has consumed so many before you." A cold sweat broke out across the caretaker's brow. The figure's words were like a poison, seeping into his very being. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't let the house win. But there was no way out. No path forward that didn't lead to the hollow. No choice but to descend. The figure raised a hand. A long, bony finger pointing toward the center of the room. There, in the middle, was a swirling vortex of darkness, like a hole in the fabric of reality itself. It beckoned, pulling at him, calling him to step into it. Step into the hollow, the figure said. It is your destiny. It is the only way for the house to be whole again. The caretaker's breath hitched. His mind screamed at him to turn around, to run, to escape. But the pull of the hollow was irresistible, and in the end, all he could do was take a step forward. And as he did, he heard the figure's voice, softer now, almost a whisper in the wind. You were always meant to be here. The darkness consumed him. The world around him twisted as he descended deeper. The vortex that had swallowed him whole didn't just pull at his body. It warped the very fabric of reality. Time itself felt distorted. Seconds stretched into hours, or perhaps it was the other way around. Every step he took, every breath he exhaled, seemed to echo in a space where sound had no meaning. The darkness that surrounded him was all-encompassing. But in the silence, there was a thrum, a heartbeat, faint but unmistakable. The hollow was alive. The caretaker's mind reeled as the ground beneath his feet felt less like solid earth and more like liquid, shifting, unstable. His thoughts began to fragment, scattering like dust in the wind. He had been pulled into something far older than the house itself, something that existed before the very first walls had been built, before the foundation had been laid. This place, this hollow, had been waiting for him. It had always been waiting for him. He tried to move, but his legs felt heavy, his steps slow and deliberate. He couldn't remember why he was walking, where he was going, or even if he had a choice in the matter. The further he went, the more everything around him seemed to distort and fracture, like reflections in shattered glass. And then he saw it, a faint glow in the distance, a flickering, almost imperceptible light. It was so small, so fragile, that for a moment he thought it was just a figment of his imagination. But the moment he focused on it, the light grew brighter. And with it, the thrum, the heartbeat, grew louder, more insistent. It called to him, pulling him like gravity, urging him forward. Each step brought him closer to the light. And the ground beneath his feet shifted again, pulling him downward as though the hollow itself was reshaping. He stumbled, caught off guard by the movement, but he didn't fall. He couldn't fall, not in a place where the rules of reality had no power. The walls, the floor, even the air, it was all fluid now, alive and changing, wrapping around him like some sentient being's embrace. As the light grew, the caretaker began to notice shapes, figures emerging from the darkness. They were blurry at first, just shadows that danced at the periphery of his vision. But then they became clearer, more distinct. They were people. No, not people. Not anymore. The figures were twisted, distorted, their bodies warped and deformed, as if their very souls had been pulled and stretched by the force of the hollow. Their faces were gaunt, hollowed-out shells, their eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on him with an expression that bordered on desperation. They moved slowly, purposefully, their limbs jerking in unnatural ways, like puppets on a string. "Help us," one of them whispered, its voice ragged and torn. But before the caretaker could respond, the figure crumbled into ash, its form disintegrating into the air as though it had never existed. The others followed, vanishing into the dark, leaving nothing but the faintest trace of their presence. The light flickered, dimming for a brief moment before it flared back to life. The caretaker pressed on, unwilling to look back. The hollow had shown him many things he wished he could forget, but he had no choice but to continue. The light was the only thing that made sense in this chaos, the only thing that seemed real. When he reached it, he stopped. The light had coalesced into a glowing orb, suspended in midair, hovering just above the ground. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, radiating warmth and cold in equal measure. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The caretaker reached out a hand, his fingers trembling, drawn toward it like a moth to a flame. But as his hand neared the orb, it flickered. The light distorted, the edges of the sphere warping and stretching like rubber. A dark shape emerged from within it, a figure, or rather, something. Something that was neither human nor beast, but something in between. It was vast, its form shifting and changing with every passing moment, a swirling mass of darkness and light, like the very essence of the hollow itself made flesh. The caretaker stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen this thing before, at the edges of his mind, at the corners of the house. It was the core of the hollow, the thing that had called him here, the thing that had been waiting for him all this time. It spoke, but not with words. The sound of its voice was a vibration, a deep resonance that shook his bones and rattled his teeth. It was an ancient sound, one that had not been heard in eons. It was the sound of the house itself speaking to him, revealing its true nature. "You have come," it said, its voice filling his mind, "to witness what you were always meant to become. To understand the hunger that lives within the walls of this place." The caretaker swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to speak, to protest, but the words wouldn't come. The figure, if it could even be called that, was overwhelming, its presence crushing. "This place is not just a house," the voice continued. "It is a living thing, a thing that feeds, grows, and evolves. And you are the key, the final piece in its never-ending cycle. You have fed it, nurtured it, and now it is time for you to become part of it." The words hit him like a wave, and for the first time, the caretaker understood. The house, the hollow, it wasn't just a place. It was a parasite, an entity that thrived on the souls it consumed, and he had been feeding it all along. His presence had nourished it, his actions had fed it, and now it was time for him to pay the price. But even as the realization sank in, a part of him fought it. The part of him that had once been human. The part that had once been alive. He couldn't become one of them. He couldn't join the others who had been twisted and consumed by the hollow. And then the ground beneath him cracked. The walls of the hollow split open, revealing a vast chasm that stretched downward into an abyss. The caretaker stumbled, barely catching himself on the shifting walls. The abyss was endless, its depths unfathomable. And at the center of it all, glowing faintly like a distant star, was a single shape, a door. The door. It was the same door he had seen when he first entered the house. The door that had led him to this moment, to this fate. It beckoned, and for the first time, the caretaker understood what he had to do. The door loomed in front of him, a presence of pure contradiction. It was simple in appearance, just a worn wooden frame with peeling paint. But in this place, it was anything but ordinary. It seemed to pulse with life, as though the very fabric of the door was tied to the hollow itself. A thread of cold air slithered through the cracks between its boards, carrying with it a whisper that chilled him to his core. "Come closer," the whisper urged. "You know what you must do." The caretaker hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. It had taken him so long to get here, to reach this point of no return. Every moment had led him to this door. It had always been his destination, but now that it was here, now that he stood before it, he wasn't sure he could take the final step. Behind him, the hollow shifted, its heartbeat still thundering in the silence. The very air felt thick, pressing in from all sides, suffocating him with the weight of its presence. The house wanted him. It needed him. "Come closer," the voice whispered again, "and the cycle will be complete." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and reached out. His hand trembled as his fingers brushed against the door. The moment they made contact, a shockwave rippled through him, a jolt of pure energy that made his body seize for a moment. The door felt cold, unnaturally so, as though it existed in a place far removed from time and space. And then, without warning, the door opened. The moment the door creaked open, a rush of air slammed into him. A gust that carried with it the scent of decay, of dust and memories long forgotten. Beyond the door was darkness, an endless abyss that seemed to stretch out forever. The space beyond wasn't just void, it was wrong, twisted, as if the very concept of light and shadow had been turned inside out. It was the heart of the hollow, the place where the house itself was born, and the very thought of stepping into it felt like stepping off the edge of sanity. But the caretaker knew there was no choice. The door had opened for him, and in that opening, he saw the truth of it all. This was the final threshold. He had come too far to turn back. He had fed the hollow with his every move, his every choice, and now the time had come for him to face what he had helped create. As he stepped through the door, he felt himself falling, not physically, but mentally. It was as though the very ground beneath him had dissolved, and he was now floating in a space where there was no up, no down. The heartbeat of the hollow pulsed in his chest, and for the first time, he realized that it wasn't just the hollow's heartbeat that echoed through him. It was his own. He was part of it now. The darkness around him shifted. He could see something now, shapes, faint outlines in the blackness, shadows that moved, that seemed to crawl and wreathe. He could hear faint whispers, voices overlapping, speaking in a language that was familiar and yet incomprehensible. "Help us," one voice begged. "Please." But before he could respond, the voice was drowned out by the others, all merging into a cacophony of screams and whispers. They weren't human voices. They were the voices of the house, the souls it had claimed over the years, lost within the hollow. The weight of their suffering pressed in on him, suffocating him with the knowledge that they would never escape, that they were all bound to this place forever. Ahead of him, a shape took form in the darkness. It was indistinct at first, but as he focused on it, it solidified into something recognizable. It was the shape of a door, but this one was different. It was not the simple wooden frame he had walked through. This door was massive, towering, and it loomed like a monolith. The edges of it were jagged, as though it had been torn from the fabric of the world itself. At the center of the door was a symbol, something ancient, a mark that pulsed with dark energy. The symbol seemed to shift before his eyes, changing with each blink, but he could make out one thing clearly: the mark was his mark. His own handprint, burned into the door like a seal. It was his fate, his burden. As he stepped closer to the door, his mind screamed for him to stop, to turn back, but he couldn't. His feet carried him forward, unwillingly, as though something else was pulling him in. The door beckoned to him like a siren, its call irresistible, and as his hand reached out to touch it, a wave of cold flooded his body, freezing him in place. A voice, no, the voice, spoke again, but this time it wasn't the hollow. It wasn't the house. It was something deeper, more primal. "You've come to the end," it said, "and now you must choose." He could feel it now. This was it, the final choice. He had been prepared for this moment, yet now that it was here, it was impossible to grasp the weight of it. Behind him, the hollow trembled. Its heartbeat quickened, becoming erratic, as though it too knew this was the end. The question hung in the air, hanging heavy and unspoken. Would he embrace it? Would he become one with the hollow, surrendering his soul to the house that had claimed so many before him? Or would he fight, attempting to break free, to sever the ties that bound him to this place? The door loomed in front of him, dark and unyielding, and as he reached for it, the choice became clear. The air in the dark space beyond the door grew colder with each breath the caretaker took. He could feel the weight of time pressing down on him, like a suffocating blanket, smothering him with the inevitability of the end. His pulse echoed in his ears, louder than the hollow's heartbeat, louder than the whispers of the souls trapped within the walls. They all murmured in unison, desperate for something, anything, that might set them free. You have come this far. You are the key. The voice, the same voice that had whispered through the walls, through the very fabric of the hollow, spoke again, soft but insistent. It was not a voice of comfort, nor one of promise. It was a command. The caretaker stood motionless before the door, his hands still hovering in the frigid air. The symbol burned into the surface of the door, seemed to pulse with an energy that was both terrifying and familiar. He could feel its grip on him, pulling him closer to the darkness beyond. The door was his. He had come to claim it. But it was also a test, a final judgment that would decide his fate. The swirling mass of shadows seemed to stir, as if waiting for him to make the next move. And as the cold wind rushed past him, he realized that the shadows had never been just shadows. They were memories. They were the souls of those who had crossed the threshold before him, those who had been consumed by the hollow, those who had failed the test. They were him. "It's your choice," the voice whispered, and the words felt like an icy blade against his skin. "Embrace your place in the cycle, or fight to end it." He could feel the pull, the urge to give in, to surrender. It had always been easier to give in to the inevitable, to allow the house to take him, to become part of it, to join the countless souls that had been lost to it over the years. The hollow had already claimed him in ways he hadn't fully understood. But now, standing before the door, he realized that it was not just the hollow that was pulling him in. It was he who had chosen to remain, who had become part of the house with each step he took toward it. He had been a part of its cycle all along. "You are the caretaker." The voice continued, this time louder, more insistent. "This is your legacy. You are bound to it. You were always meant to be." The caretaker's mind raced. He had always known the truth, but hearing it now made it feel so real. He had been part of the house all along. The hollow had chosen him, not by chance but by design. He had been marked, long before he had ever walked into this house. The memories he had uncovered, his strange connection to this place, had all led to this moment. But what if he didn't have to give in? What if there was another way? His hand trembled as he reached out to touch the door. The cold burned him as his fingers made contact with the surface. The symbol flared with a blinding light, and for a moment, the air around him seemed to still. The pulse of the hollow's heartbeat slowed, then stopped, and silence descended. In that moment, everything became clear. The choice was his. The hollow had never been just a place. It had been a living, breathing entity, a reflection of the deepest fears and desires of those who had entered it. The house had fed on its victims, growing stronger with each soul it consumed, but now, for the first time, it was vulnerable. The caretaker had been its lifeblood, its anchor, but now that he understood the truth, he knew that he could sever the bond. He could destroy it. But that would come at a cost. He could already feel the weight of the souls, trapped within the walls, pressing against him. They screamed out for release, but their cries were no longer the cries of torment. They were the cries of hope. Hope that he could end the cycle, that he could free them once and for all. The door, now bathed in the glow of the symbol, seemed to shimmer with power. It was both a gateway and a prison, a door that held the hollow in place. And it was up to him to decide whether to step through and claim his place in the endless cycle of the house, or destroy it. A surge of energy coursed through him as the door began to open on its own. The darkness beyond it seemed to pulse, drawing him in, promising peace. but also condemning him to a fate that he could never undo. For a moment he thought of the souls that had come before him, the ones who had failed. He thought of the people whose lives had been lost to the hollow, and the weight of their lives pressed down on him like an unbearable burden. But there was something more, something deeper that he could no longer ignore. He had a choice. With a final, desperate breath, the caretaker stepped forward. He felt the energy of the hollow pull at him, trying to claim him, to devour him, but this time he fought back. He focused all his will, all his strength, on the door. The hollow's power trembled beneath his resolve. And then, in one final, wrenching moment of clarity, he understood. The hollow could not exist without him. He was the anchor, the caretaker of its dark power. But if he severed the connection, if he broke the cycle, the house would crumble. It would finally be free of its endless hunger. With a cry that echoed through the darkness, the caretaker reached out one final time and tore the symbol from the door. The door shattered before him, splintering into millions of pieces as the hollow screamed in agony. The ground trembled, and the walls began to crack, the entire structure beginning to collapse around him. The souls trapped within the house wailed, their voices rising in unison as the darkness began to recede, fading into nothingness. In the end, the hollow was no more. The house, once a living, breathing entity, fell silent. The heartbeat that had once filled the air was gone, and with it, the nightmare that had plagued this place for so long. The caretaker stood alone, surrounded by the remnants of the house. His body was exhausted, his mind broken by the weight of his decision, but he had done it. He had ended the cycle. And as the last remnants of the hollow faded away, he knew one thing for certain: the house was gone, and he was free.